433 duelists stepped up to prove that, well, the meta is about what we're expecting. Alright, to the 30% of you that have not smashed the ever-living crap out of that subscribe button, smash it so you guys don't miss out on more awesome content. So what is going on right now out of this 400-man event with a, well, day one with a cut to top 32, and day 32 ended up being a top 32 elimination. Winning the event was actually Purrely, which was actually pretty amazing, actually. We're actually starting to see some pretty interesting tech choices with that deck right now. And I'm going to say this now. Some of these innovations that this deck is kind of bringing to the table is actually very impressive. We also see Exosister here climbed up through the bottom of the wellspring and actually placed at a second place. Exosister has been like super quiet, super dormant, hasn't really had the chance to really shine as of late. And then you look to this 400 event and your finals is Purrely versus Exosister, and I think that's absolutely amazing. We also had for top 4, we had a Kashtira and an Ishizu Tier Elements. Now for those of you that have been paying attention to the OCG format, you know what kind of menace the Ishizu Tier Elements deck actually is. Since the TCG didn't want to deal with it, you know, we saw much harder restrictions on the deck, but the OCG is still dealing with that. And the fact that Kashtira is still functioning in its much more reduced state in the OCG is actually pretty impressive. Like, I'm actually very happy to see that. Now, for your top 8 for what we have one Purrely deck that made it. So you had, for what we have for data, you had 2 Purrelys making it on in to top cut, which is actually kind of impressive in and in itself. That deck is so good. The fact that you basically make an indestructible cat that your opponent actually has to try to find a way to out is actually an issue. We also had a Sword Soul 10 Yi deck here. Now remember, their Macrocosmo, you know, Kashtira deck has been greatly reduced. Robbie, they also have Macro and Dai-Fi 3. Yeah, I know that, but those cards tend to not see relatively large amounts of play. Most people will play reduced numbers just to try to not deal with that. So that's something big. Now, top 16 down here, we don't have all of the data either, but there was an Ishizu Tier Element, so you had, actually you had 2 in top 16. So overall 3 within the confines of top 16. So yeah, you can definitely tell what your conversion rate is for that deck. We also had the Ishizu Vernal Sif at Emancipator, which has kind of started to turn over into what has been dubbed the Earth Toolbox deck. I know we have Earthbox, which is like the machine of good stuff with Infinitrack, but this is, you know, using all of the best Earth engines that you can kind of, you know, put together. I also see that we also had a Sprite Tri-Brigade deck make it into top cut. Now, does any of this surprise me? No. After, what is this, like 14 rounds, to see that Purrely was the most consistent monster within top cut? No, not at all. Like I said, Indestructible Cat is crazy good. Exosister, I think, is the most surprising thing to me out of this top cut, because we haven't really seen that deck really perform as of late. And I suppose, you know, Purrely sucking things up from the graveyard and actually doing manipulation through effects that would actually give Exosister a chance to kind of climb up. But does Exosister, you know, have an out to the big cat? Well, I guess we'll see here in a second. Let's pass on over to those top deck lists. Starting the event here, well, was none other than Purrely sporting off Volcanic Shell. Now, this is one of the first times that I've seen Volcanic Shell actually getting some legwork here in the OCG. Also, it acts as level 1, acts as a discard fodder for this deck. Actually, the thing you care about most is the fact that this is a discard fodder. You're going to get some pretty free advantage engine pieces going for this, and that's amazing. The entire gimmick of this deck is you're just going to try to set up the big cat. Well, you are going to set up the big cat. The rest of your extra deck is just kind of utility outs to make sure that you can set things up. A lot of people call this deck the giant Zeus deck. You know, how many materials can you stack up? And while that is a gimmick that this deck can actually do, it doesn't end up being the primary driving motive of this. So do keep that in mind when you are looking at this deck. While the deck itself is relatively straightforward, drawing multiple cards during your opponent's standby phase and an indestructible card, pretty good. Next up here is Exosister. Oh, Look at that, we're playing Arotama and Nikitama. These are the spirit monsters that give you the ability to basically normal summon out extenders without taking away your ability to do Martha plays. Now, that's actually very important. A lot of people kind of don't understand that Martha has some pretty harsh restrictions on her, and the spirits actually give you additional normal summons to kind of play around, you know, those pretty decently hard locks that you get. It's actually kind of cool that the Spirit Engine has found a way into Exosister to help this deck kind of turn into a little bit more consistent than we'd seen in the past. So I'm actually very happy about that. As for the rest of this, it's going to feel pretty straightforward. As you can see, we're also playing the Dark Rebellion package down there to make the bigger pendulum. So you can basically make a Zeus with 4 materials, or if you need to basically control your opponent's resources, you know, deal some damage, you got a lot of ways to do so. Now we move on along here, we have our Kashtira deck here. Now, this is the state that Kashtira has been left in the OCG. This deck has been forced to literally go play Planet Pathfinder in order to play the game. With Purrely, Ray Sloth, and all limited to 1. Yeah, the OCG took the exact opposite method that the TCG did. They didn't give 2 craps about the field spells. They just went straight after the limitations, and that's why you're seeing things like Planet Pathfinder, while Fenrir and Unicorn are restricted. Outside of that, Saruja is kind of an interesting thing. This deck also still has access to Tomahawk, which is an incredibly busted card in and itself. My favorite part about this deck is just, want to watch me draw a crap ton of cards? Yeah, that's it's kind of the things you get out of this deck. But overall, you know, the control aspect of this deck still very strong. Still one of the best acting decks out there. And it doesn't really surprise me to see that this is, you know, actually stepping up and doing relatively well here. Next up here we have Kashtira Tier Elements, aka I'm going to put 3 Tier Elements Kashtira in my deck, and we're off to the races with a splashed Fenrir. Now, as you can see here, they still get access to Fairy Tales now. That boggles my mind that they get the chance to even play that stupid good card. Now, the rest of this deck is honestly pretty straightforward. You're going to use the Ishizu cards that aren't restricted to 1 for whatever reason, and you're just going to not care. You're just going to proceed to play the game. Also, I guess I should probably put in at this point that you've seen a lot of Exceed Encores in a lot of these decks. And you know why? That's because the big cat is an issue. It's almost like Purrely just won the event or something, but you know, I guess if you can't draw the Exceed Encore, if you mill all of them, what are you supposed to do? Like, that's Yu-Gi-Oh! In a nutshell. I feel like at the end of the day, did you see the out, yes or no? And if the answer is no, well, you're just going to pick up your cards and straight walk away. Next up here was our second Purrely deck. Now, this build is not playing our good friends over at the Ishizu, or excuse me, over at the Volcanic Shell department. They just went ahead and they said, you know what? As much as we like those cards, we don't see much of a purpose to include them in the deck. And you know what? I'll give it to them. You don't. While Volcanic Shell is a very good resource, you know, generator for this, I mean, it doesn't look like you need it, right? I mean, this deck still made top cut. I would probably consider playing the Volcanic Shell. I've already noticed that Shell has already kind of started to make waves in the OCG a little bit before this championship started to happen, or about the same time. So a lot of them have already kind of figured out that, hey, you know, Volcanic Shell is just kind of, you know, free resources for this deck. You know, if you dead draw 2 of them, well, oh well, you know, all your Purrely cards are going to get you off to the races anyway. You're just doing it to supplement the discard to maintain, you know, a flow of hand. And the last as we have for this was actually a Sword Soul, and this is playing Sword Soul Iris. Holy moly. Haven't seen that, like, ever, actually. I see we're still playing good old band Protoss. I really wish we got the chance to do that too. And I see this build is still doing the Magic Key Instant Fusion shenanigans, just so you can make, you know, the free level 8 along the way. It's a pretty cool gimmick. I'll give it to them. You know, the whole idea that you're able to kind of process and step through and access, you know, a free level 4 tuner off of an instant fusion does feel pretty good at the end of the day. It could put you in a free winning position if need be, or if your opponent, you know, token collectors you get the chance to kind of play around it. I mean, level 4 plus, you know, one of your bigger 10Es unlocks some pretty cool combinations. I also like how this deck gets to play Danglong like it's its job or something. So, very interesting. But what do you guys think about these deck lists in this event? Please leave a comment down below. Tell me what you guys think. I'll see your beautiful faces back here later in the day, guys. Peace. you.
Thank you so much for watching. Check out these other videos.